You're listening to the Merry Band of Pirates, an unofficial Expeditionary Force podcast.
Welcome to the Merry Band of Pirates, an unofficial Expeditionary Force podcast. This is episode 6. In today's episode, we're picking up in the middle of chapter 3 with UNEF on Camp Alpha, where we will be discussing the rules and much more. Stay with us. At the end of the episode, we have a huge announcement for our young podcast. You are not going to want to miss this, so I promise, stay with us to the end of this episode because this is going to be really big. We can't believe we get to say this too. My name is Steve, and with me, as always, are the Merry Band of Pirates. We've got Joey, Marianne, Charlie, and Jake. Unfortunately, we are missing our final pirate, Andy. He's unable to be with us tonight. Now, some of you have said to us that we're going really slow. And the answer is, yep, we sure are. We've been going pretty slow. There's so much in Columbus Day for us to unpack, but especially here in chapter 3, we already recorded the first episode. So if you've not listened to the last episode of the podcast, go back and listen to it. That will be your chance to hear about getting to Camp Alpha, about learning about the coalition, and that obviously has huge ramifications throughout the series to get to know the two different coalitions for the Rindaloo and the Maxults. But today we're going to start with the rules, and then we're going to be able to dive into a little bit of Joe's relationship with Shauna and their first war scenario that they play out on Camp Alpha and much more. That's what we're going to get to in this episode. So as I said, this is a full episode. We can't believe we get to be here and do this with you. Welcome to the Merry Band of Pirates. Now, Joey, if we could jump right into the rules. There's so much to say here. If you could lead our discussion as we talk about the rules.
The rules are in all caps because that's how it's written. Well, last time when we were covering the first half of chapter 3, we ended at what you said, the coalitions, which is absolutely true. You got the allied and the enemy coalitions, the different alien races around this fictional universe that Craig Allenson created. And that ended right as they went into talking about the rules, because the rules, they kind of matter, right? They're kind of important. So what I want to do is take a few minutes to talk about these 5 main rules because they play out throughout pretty much the rest of the series from time to time. And what's really fun is it's kind of like, what's that on Star Trek? They've got the Prime Directive. And if you're a fan of Star Trek and you watch a lot of that, you'll notice that in pretty much every series, they're just constantly breaking that rule. And we see that a lot in Expeditionary Force as well. In fact, we see it almost as soon as they're done explaining the rules, they start talking about, by the end of this chapter, how one of the rules is already being broken, which I think is pretty funny, right? He doesn't waste any time getting right into that.
Not only do they get broken, because you almost could predict that that's going to happen as soon as he introduces the rules, but they almost become, in some ways, the roadmap of what we get to see. And you can almost track the series by the violation of the rules.
Yeah, and he even has a way of saying, these are the good guys and these are the bad guys, and you can tell they're the bad guys because they're the ones breaking the rules all the time. They're very comfortable with it. All right, so what are the rules? The rules are the military rules of combat engagement, basically. And we have those here on Earth. We have things like the Geneva Convention where you're not supposed to do this and you're supposed to do that. All these military guidelines, if you will, to keep people in check when we're at war with each other. And of course, in the book series, it's a Star Wars, right? Like they're at war with all these different factions and alien species and everything. So the point of the rules is, well, it seems that they're, habitable planets are pretty rare. And so they want to make sure that they stay habitable. And the two main coalitions, the Maxults and the Rindaloo, are trying to make sure that as the different species that they rule over are warring, actually engaged in the war that is between those two major species, those top tier species, that they are trying to make sure that those planets continue to remain habitable. And so that's what the rules are essentially. Otherwise, both sides would have wiped each other out a long time ago. That's why they don't actually engage in the war themselves. They have these second tier, third tier species actually fight each other. So we've got 5 rules. We have rule number 1, which is the no use of nukes. And we know from having been using nukes for 80 years now in on Earth and in reality that these things can cause a lot of harm, and they're not something you want to just be messing around with. And when it comes to biologies and biospheres, that's something that could definitely mess up what's going on. What I think is really interesting is that nukes actually become kind of like a major element in future books. There's even a character, Mr. Nuki.
Mr. Nuki is, I think, the whole conversation that Skippy has with all the nukes and how did he convince them to go, and like they're forming their own what is called their union is like part of what I enjoy. And the whole conversation, of course, happens in nanoseconds, and it's like the monkey brains trying to wait and understand what's going on, why Skippy is making such a fuss about it. And the whole conversation is always like very funny to me that everything is happening before something blows up.
Yeah, I love the characters that the missiles have, the nukes.
Personalities. The
Yeah, and
personalities.
that it's actually like they desire to blow things up, and when they don't get a chance to do that, they're like depressed and upset about it. I love that. It's so funny.
I always felt bad. I don't remember. It wasn't Mr. Nuki, but I remember one of the weapons, the missiles being fired off, and unfortunately, it never hit a target. It was destined to go out into deep space without ever hitting anything for maybe a million years, if it's lucky. And I have often thought about that one missile every time a new missile gets brought up or we're introduced to a new character. I can't help but feel sad because it's like you said, Joey, these missiles are absolutely depressed if they're not blowing something up. So he must be the most depressed missile literally in the universe. It makes you wonder if he could just maybe hit the self-destruct button on himself just to call it quits.
There are certain scenes in the course of this series that are so funny and so make you stop. When you first learn about Skipistan, like I was out like on the side of cleaning my pool, and I thought I was almost going to fall in when he starts talking about the yak in Skipistan for the first time. It was so funny.
But we have a yak.
That's how I felt about Mr. Nuki. So that you've got the first time I'm listening to this, I can picture where I was standing as I'm listening to Mr. Nuki and realizing he just anthropomorphized a nuclear warhead. I don't think I've seen that before in a book.
Like you were saying, if you get a nuke that goes out to space and everything, they're happy when they can destroy somebody, which is kind of off-putting because they're dead too, but they're like let's blow up.
Everybody needs a purpose, right?
Yeah, but that's the weirdest purpose to have.
My question now is, okay, no nukes are supposed to be used to blow up planets, but you can use to blow up spaceships?
They seem to use them to blow up spaceships all the time. So
all the time, yeah.
But no dropping them on planets. That's basically what the rules are all about. Like no ruining any biosphere. So that brings us to number 2, which is no chemical weapons. Do you guys recall any times where there was a chemical weapon used throughout the series?
Right at the beginning, wasn't it? In the next few chapters, spoiler alert, the next few chapters that talk about it, I guess, isn't it?
Well, they talk about one of them in this chapter, but it's at the very end of this chapter, but it's not chemical weapons. I don't remember any where they used chemical weapons. Do you guys remember any?
No, I'm thinking biological weapons, but I don't remember chemical.
I say that's a good question. Now I'm racking my mind because I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, and now I'm just blanking as to what it is.
Well, we'll think about it and come back to it. Number 3 is no nano weapons. Now, this was one I was excited to bring up and talk about because although he doesn't really touch on it here in Columbus Day, there is an entire book at some point in the future. Honestly, I can't remember which one it was, but I know it's quite far into the series where there's an entire solar system filled with nano machines that are essentially weaponized, and they can't travel through that solar system because of that. And he does actually, I think, mention it. In fact, if I look here, it says nanotech was widely used to make things, but it could be used as a weapon. Even the Kristang were unsure of the basis for this rule, but ancient rumor held that there was an incident where nanotech got loose and caused that entire star system to be quarantined permanently, hence no nanoweapons, which makes me wonder if Craig Allenson wrote this thinking, hey, maybe someday, or at some point in the books, he was like, what do I put in this book? And he harkened back to this chapter 3 of Columbus Day and went, oh, there's this whole part where I talk about this theory, this rumor, and I could go ahead and make a whole book about these nanoweapons that took over an entire star system.
What I remember on nano weapons is, if I might be misspeaking here, but isn't a whole chapter where the Kristang had some, I think the Kristang kind of put something on the terrain ships that Skippy was able to access to put everybody to sleep or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
and then
It wasn't nano, but it was the Ranin actually put a computer virus that Skippy was able to use on the Kristang ships. But it was
so it goes backwards.
it was
Yeah.
the own Theranin technology that he used to put the Theranin to sleep. It wasn't nanotechnology. It was just literally their actual
Brain.
technology.
Yes. Okay.
Think of the Borg, who they would go to sleep in those pods. Think of the Theranin doing the same thing, and Skippy was able to just trigger an activation for them to go to their sleep pods and go to sleep, so they didn't have to fight them the first time they encountered them. We're going to get to that in a couple of chapters, though. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that that's exactly the point, that even if you can't say, well, this is the time nanotech was weaponized, we can look and see, well, a certain amount of cheating is allowed, I'm sure you will talk about in just a moment. But I think we see that in a variety of these rules. So with the nanotech, the line between whether it was a nanotech weapon or it was nanotech that was used in a way to accelerate the weapon or to deploy a weapon or to sneak into the place where the weapon could be activated or to sneak a ship into a place that a ship was not supposed to be able to get to. The line of whether it was a nanotech weapon or a nanotech being used in a way to facilitate an offensive attack is probably a pretty fine line for them.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt. All right, so this brings us to number 4, which is the one that we're going to talk about them breaking almost immediately, and that is no biological weapons. And this one tends to come up again in Paradise. It comes up pretty much throughout, I think, the whole series, because it's really easy for these advanced cultures to create biological weapons, essentially. I mean, and it's ironic that 5-6 years ago we went through a whole, not a biological weapon, but we had a pandemic, and so there's certainly something that could be said that they could create these weapons that could create havoc and wreak havoc, which they do in this book. When it comes to going to Paradise, the Kristang they cannot actually go to the planet because of a bioweapon.
So they say that, but I mean, we really don't. It doesn't really expand on if it's actually true or not.
Well, I mean, don't you think they would go down there or do you think that they're just sending humans down because it's dirty work and they don't want to do it? It's like, get the new guy to clean the toilet. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
And the line between the Kristang had to be in specialized suits to go down to the surface to the fact that there's later Kristang walking along on the surface, and there's not really any indication that hazard has been lifted or completely dealt with. So we're supposed to just assume that it's gone, that bio threat now is no longer a threat.
Right. Well, if you remember in future books, they actually give the humans a virus that is not harmful to humans, but it's harmful to the Ruhar, if I remember correctly, with the there's a faction of humans that are loyal to the Kristang, and so they give them this virus that then make them harmful to the Ruhar. Yeah. One of the things I thought was interesting when he's talking in the book about this particular rule, he uses the word sketchy for the first time, which if you're a fan of X-Force, you know that sketchy becomes a pretty common terminology, and especially when it comes to the Beatles, they're notorious for doing sketchy things. And he says this rule is just a little bit sketchy. In actual use, viruses, bacteria, and other biological hazards mutate over time, and if known, natural viruses become more contagious or deadly. Who could say that couldn't happen naturally? Yeah, that's kind of interesting that he brings that up.
Yeah, and I think it's really funny that he goes on. But apparently a certain level of cheating is allowed as long as it doesn't get out of control and nobody gets caught. So
as long as nobody gets caught.
War, and so there's some rules to this war, but they're negotiable depending on what we can and can't do and what we think we can get away with.
You know what's really interesting, Steve, is that as the series progresses, you come to find out that there are times where there are treaties between the Ruhar and the Kristang, or the Theranin and the Giraffe. It's so weird that they're at war with each other, but it's other times they're like transporting each other, even though if they knew that there was this biological attack at this one point in breaking of the rules, this war's been going on in the books for thousands of years, so for millennia. Then I guess you have to kind of forgive your enemy at one point if you need a ride somewhere. It's weird.
You need a tow truck.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Rule number 5 is, simply put, no dropping rocks. And this one's kind of interesting because, this one's kind of terrifying. We talk about asteroids and meteorites and things like that, comets, here on Earth. And if you've ever read the Expanse book series, that's a major plot point in the series, where the bad guys essentially start dropping rocks on Earth and making it, spoiler alert, it's not good. So, and they have to defend it against that. And how do you defend the Earth against stealth rocks from the asteroid field being redirected and sent, toward Earth and wreaking havoc on our planet? And so the same thing goes with trying to protect these biospheres, these other planets within this series. It becomes a pretty major one. I don't recall any times where they talk about this, but the elders do. The elders do wreak a lot of havoc.
That's the second time you've already you've said that.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So they
time for a doo-doo.
Are we going to have a doo-doo counter?
I think it's, what time it is? But the elders wreak havoc on planets by not just dropping rocks on them, but ripping entire whole chunks of rock out. So that's kind of interesting to me. He does talk about railgun strikes, though, and that is something that does play in a lot, because even later in this chapter, during a simulated war, railgun strikes are used to take out, Joe's whole platoon, basically. And in the future, railgun strikes become a real major tool that they use. So it's kind of interesting that he touches on it. Makes me wonder if he wrote the book and then got to the end and he was like, maybe dropping railguns from orbit to take out the bad guys is going to cause some problems with people who read chapter 3 about dropping rocks. So he went back and put in this little caveat. What do you guys think?
It seems like a lot of these rules are in place to protect their potential assets more than it is to protect civilization. Like, they don't want to damage their potential gangs. So it seems like they don't want to break the rules when it's inconvenience for them. It's kind of that type of situation.
Didn't one of the planets that Joe and the pirates went to do, they stopped, one of the books, they stopped at the planet and discovered that the planet used to have life, or used to have other species living there. They got extinct because of some movement of the planet. And they were trying to backtrack to figure it out why the planet went bad, basically. And I think it was a rock that hit the planet or something like that.
Yeah, we're going to get several versions of that, from Newark getting pushed out of its original orbit to when they're on gingerbread, the Guardians several times. There's a whole discussion on Joe and Skippy discovering the alignment between the potential explorations of that system and the timing of the big holes appearing on the surface of the planet, and realizing that the Guardians had been doing exactly that, dropping rocks onto gingerbread.
Sorry, we're like pulling a lot of spoilers right now.
We gave a spoiler alert.
This is chapter 3.
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about book 10 right now.
Yeah, well, let's do that. If you're not reading these books, why are you listening to us? Honestly.
Steve, thank you, Joey. Now that's where I've been the whole time.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So that's the rules. They're in all caps for a reason. They're essentially the Geneva Convention for space warfare, and it's what is setting up things for the future.
Thank you. That was perfect segue, talking about the Geneva Convention, because this is one of the things that I think is really funny here. And he's going to do it again when we get to the Burgermeister, talking about the Geneva Convention. He said that, like, he talks about the biological agents being against the rules. And then he goes to say, it's kind of like a Geneva Convention thing, because it's not going to affect, would only affect the one species, that every species different enough that an agent targeting one would not affect others. So he makes the comment, it's kind of like a Geneva Convention thing. And then he gets to the end of the rules and says, there's no equivalent to the Geneva Convention.
Yeah.
And fast forward, and we're going to get the same thing that's going to happen when the Burgermeister comes on the scene, where you're going to get this comment about it being like a Geneva Convention and no equivalent to the Geneva Convention. You're going to get the comment from both sides in a very short window.
Yeah. It's a nice little contradictory statement.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's funny.
I am done with the rules, man. We're going to be talking about them, I'm sure, in the future, but that's the basic breakdown right there.
No, thank you for leading us through that discussion of the rules, Joey. The reality is, to Mary Ann's point, there's no way to talk about the rules without running forward a little bit in time to how that all starts to show up. And there'll be a lot of times where we'll think about the rules and because they're in real time what's happening in the story, and we'll have to harken back to them. So I'm sure that we will ping pong to and from the rules frequently over future episodes. With that, let us move on to our next section here, and that is the discussion of the relationship with Shauna. Jake, you want to walk us through the relationship with Shauna?
You know I do. I am excited about this part, and it's, all joking aside, we're going to have some laughs through this, but this is actually a really good piece of writing here. Joe is on Camp Alpha, and if you remember, I believe the ratio to boys to girls is 16%, and I'm no mathematician, but I believe it's roughly 6-1. So, we got a lot of young men all in the military. They're really excited. So as Joe has seen, Sean, I believe we talked about it in the last podcast, they were in that foot race to the very end, and I think she actually ended up winning that race, which is tells you right away what kind of woman she really is, and not to be trifled with. So naturally, Joe Bishop is attracted, and he's got a fail-proof test pretty much to tell if a man is attracted to a woman, and or I should say, if he wants a woman, and he has to have one or two things: a pulse, and he has to be conscious. So it is in his mind. He is a young male. He's thinking about the women all the time. One woman in particular, and turns out she's kind of thinking about him too. She does have a thing for Joe Bishop. He goes to, I believe it was send him a text message, if I remember correctly, and he was going to respond back to, what is this, a booty call? Now, Joe Bishop, he's the type of guy that sometimes he thinks before he acts, so he did the smart thing, and he deleted that text message. But it becomes kind of funny because it turns out that it was just a booty call. Joe is actually into Shauna, and I think Shauna is into Joe as well. I think it's a two-way street, but the reality of it is they're in a battlefield. They don't know where they're going to be tomorrow. They don't know if they're going to make it home to Earth. I mean, it's a real and practical situation for two young people, and then two young people are going to do what they are going to do. And at first, Joe is kind of a little offended about this. He doesn't want to be used. I mean, the guy actually, he comes from strong stock. He comes from good people. He's a Mainer. So he really cares. He doesn't want to just be somebody's property. But after Shauna convinces him and his little buddy gets involved, he decides it's really not a bad situation when the odds are 6-1 on Camp Alpha. So they're going to stick it out. They're a little bit more than friends, but they're definitely friends with benefits. And if you ask me, Joe Bishop, he does pretty good for himself. He's like James Bond, but with, like country character. No matter where he goes, that guy is a stud, and he's showing it right now. And this is not going to be the first interaction we have with Joe Bishop in the opposite sex. But I will say Joe Bishop is a gentleman. His little buddy may have a mind of his own and do whatever he wants to do, but Joe Bishop upstairs is a very smart, sensitive guy. He's very protective, respectful to women. I mean, he really is the guy that you want your daughter to bring home sometime. I don't know. What do you guys think? Tell me if I'm off base.
Oof, you went through a lot. It's pretty adorable how he worries a lot about how this relationship is perceived, and how he, of course, he has this whole thing on his head where he's worried about um, how she's gonna take it because, of course, as Jake said, it's a lot of men for the amount of women on the planet, and making sure that she is comfortable with him, I think, is one of the priorities. So him being very self-conscious on what he's replying and how he's handling it, even on his own head, like, oh, I shouldn't have done this, or oh my gosh, I should. Like, there's a part where he's like, oh yeah, after we went through all this, I'm putting my clothes back on, and I tell her I'm gonna call her, and he's like, oh, I should not have put my clothes on yet, and tell her that first. It's basically like he's like always worried in his head on how things are gonna go or how she's gonna react. And she's like, don't worry about it. We are here together. It's just war. We don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow. Just let's enjoy the time and not be very strong about this. So I think she takes like the whole worry about the relationship out of the window and makes it fun for the both of them.
Yeah, and I think here there's the other side of her I didn't really talk about is she's broken, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful, cold-hearted way. She wants revenge to what happened to her on Earth. She's mad. She's not in a place where she's thinking about sharing life, because right now her life only has one purpose, and that is to get revenge against the Ruhar for what they did on Columbus Day. They scared her grandmother. They scared people she really cares about. And I think there's a part of her that is afraid to get too close to somebody else because it just makes her more vital. Another thing that something can be hurt in her life. So she is going through a lot of pain, and she has her own issues. But she's a great character. You can't help but love her from the get-go. I don't think she does Joe bad. She keeps, she's got an A in my book.
Well, she keeps him in his toes, basically. Like he, one of the meetings, like I think the meeting that they exchange numbers or something like that. He comes in like kind of bragging, but he doesn't want to say that he's bragging. And that's like, what were you doing
Yeah.
the Columbus Day? And he's like, well, I'm not bragging, but but were you getting in trouble? And it's funny because I know he wants to bring a little bit of his story, which everybody knows his story. He's the Barney guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's like, well, here is what happened. I cannot look at the sky without thinking anymore what's out there. They scared my grandma, how you said, like, there's so many things in the background that now they they are just bonding over what happened to them back in Earth and how they are there all because they want this to end and get revenge. So it's that bonding, that conversation on how they are scared when they look at the sky and how they both of them share the same experience. It's looking back on their life too, not just on what they're doing, but all the perspective that what they all went through.
Absolutely.
I want to just say how both of you guys touched on this inner monologue of Joe, and I just want to speak to Craig's defense of manhood, because he really nailed how I think most guys, certainly me at 21, would be thinking about these kinds of situations. He's second guessing everything. He writes the text in a typical Joe Bishop fashion and then immediately erases it, right, and then writes something more sensible. We've all been through that, and I think you had said it, Marianne, how maybe he does want to have something a little bit more, but that's just not the reality of the situation. And so even though he wants to be chivalrous, he wants to do the right thing, and that plays out in that inner monologue. She gives him an out, and so I love that. When you read a lot and you see how men write the inner monologue of women, or how women authors write the inner monologue of men, it doesn't always feel genuine. And in this case, certainly for me, and I could tell from listening to you guys as well, it feels very much like very relatable. Oh yeah, I could go with Joe on this whole thought process. And what's really interesting is, this is a space war series. This is not a romance novel series by any means. And there are a few other opportunities for Joe to have some romance in the future, and certainly a lot more much later on. But it's not a main part of the story, but it is a part that I think if a young guy was reading this, he'd be like, well, where's the opportunities? So it gives you a little bit of a nugget to just say, here's this opportunity, but then he doesn't really come back to it all that often, which I kind of appreciate, because he's not trying to create these scenarios. He's just sort of letting them happen as we think they would play out.
And it's interesting how it touches on everybody's lives, basically, because I'm sure I'm not alone on this, being the girl here. But everybody had is she going to text me back? Is he going to text me back? Oh, do I call? Do I wait? Do I make hard to get? And like, since we all have phones, like, is it vibrating? And did the phone ring? Like, I'm definitely, when I was a teenager, definitely sat by the phone waiting for a phone call that never came too. Like, so everybody has had that experience, and the same way he talks about it, it's like, yes, you're touching on everybody's personal life. At some point, someone did that.
Yeah, he even mentions that, how his grandmother, who grew up before the internet, talks about waiting by the phone for him. So he throws in these little, they're just nothing lines, but they really do matter. And what they do is, like you said, they kind of touch everyone's point of view so that it's relatable to just more than just the 21-year-old guy.
Real quick, after that, I am so glad that, and I think I speak for all of us here, I'm so glad that I am not on the dating scene. It is much easier to be married.
Amen, brother.
Amen to that. And only harder now than it ever has been.
Yeah.
For real.
I'm sure that you guys have got oh no, what did I forgot to buy? Because she messaged me, dinner is ready, or that she's waiting. There's something to celebrate. I'm sorry. I know you all had that one day.
But we're still men.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's keep moving forward here. We are Operation Valiant Shield.
Wait. Sorry. Oh. There's one thing on this chapter that I need to share. the Joey and Shauna. So Joe goes through a whole monologue about, of course, sex. And I'm sorry, I'm going to say it. But there's a part, he doesn't go, like, it's amazing how Craig doesn't go into details. And it's phenomenal, especially being like a military book or a sci-fi book. And I loved it how he is curt throughout the story and everything. But at some point, he's like, if you never had sex, I'm gonna say it was phenomenal or something. But and he goes through the whole monologue, and he just does. It was A.W.E.S.O.M.E. Oh God, I couldn't even do the acronym myself. And funnily enough, my friend just started the book, and I get a text message saying, "What does the acronym means?" And I turn around like acronym throughout the book. So the only acronym throughout that whole chapter that could be like not discernible was awesome. And I'm just answering back, "Oh, you're saying A.W.E.S.O.M.E." And he's like, "Oh shit, I didn't really realize."
Yeah, when you're listening
What
to
was
it, you lose something there unless you're thinking about it and spelling it out, right? You're thinking it's an acronym. When you read it, it makes a lot more sense.
Yes, and I never had so much fun just listening, like reading the message, like, what's the acronym? What does this mean? And I'm like, awesome.
I did appreciate, like, of all the ways that you could have that scene unfold, it was a little bit cheesy the way he tells it. But he tells it in a way without having to go down the road of getting really detailed and like make it something that the story's not. So I appreciate it. He was able to tell it and still kind of the lighthearted, silly, playful Joe way, and not trying to make something else fit where it wouldn't have fit.
I agree.
Thank you. Sorry for breaking it down.
Are we ready now for Valiant Shield?
Yes.
Operation Valiant Shield, the first of the war scenarios that they are going to have to play out. Charlie, would you mind kind of walking us through and sharing some thoughts on that first war scenario?
It's basically a war game. You know, we're going in, we're seeing how we can actually do against the Ruhar. And yeah, we don't fare up too well. We might as well have just gone in there and gave them our guns and turned around and walked back home. Might have been better than just getting killed with railguns.
It seems like, well, we don't know quite yet in this where we are in the book, the Kristang. The last thing they want to do is let the humanity of the human race to become a threat. So it sounds like they're definitely setting them up for failure. I mean, they're out in platoon squads. They're trying to think tactical. I believe they split up, so not all of them would be taken out in just one strike. But, you know, they get their Z-Fo message, "Oh, you're just taken out by a rail strike. You're all dead. Go back home." And they're not really training. They're not getting better. They're almost reminded, it's almost having a reverse reaction. They're almost putting them down like, you guys don't stand a chance out here. You're not going to win. You're not going to accomplish anything. You're not going to get better. And they're purposely messing up their operations too. Like, the administration is an absolute Charlie Foxtrot. I'll let you guys figure out what that means there. And it is, and it really is. But they do sit down at a baseball game. I believe it was a baseball game where they talk to a pilot, and he tells them that he was able to, I believe he shot down 2 birds. So we're actually seeing that the humans are already showing signs of having and threatening, and not intentions, but the way they're learning so quick. Like, we already got a pilot from the Air Force flying an alien jet, the equivalent of alien jet, and it's shooting down other jets. And that's something I think might have took the Kristang back just a little bit, how fast the humans can adapt and respond to the situation.
Yeah, he's actually an Army Apache pilot. That's an interesting point, Jake, because he talks about the difference between flying a helicopter and flying basically a fighter jet. You know, they're not relatable at all. But he's even able to hit 2 targets before, I think it's 2 targets before he's taken out of the fight as well. And I think that him being taken out it's really interesting that you say that, because I think that it's the Kristang are making a point that you guys are not qualified to fight in these battles, and we're not really going to give you an opportunity. Whereas that it seems as though that pilot was taking an advantage. He was getting the opportunity to do that.
I think that the whole story with the pilot is really fun to listen to. That's one of my favorite scenes in this chapter. And again, you get to the little details that make it entertaining. I got up and got him another hot dog so he wouldn't stop talking. Or even earlier in that sequence, maybe he didn't want to talk, but a pilot never wants to stop talking about flying.
Do you guys know how you can tell if somebody's a pilot? They'll tell you.
They'll tell you. Yeah.
A lot of it too was, like they say in the book, back in World War II, you're not just going to go at the beginning of that and invade Normandy. You got to train. You got to start from the bottommost rung and work your way up to Normandy.
I think, though, Jake, that your point is so important because it actually plays in both directions. One is this case of the Kristang not wanting the humans to go too far. But there's also this other side of it that is very core to what Craig has said it was a motivation for him in this series, in that he was tired of the sci-fi story where the alien space species that can cross over light years to get to Earth are almost immediately defeated and on the defensive against the plucky humans that with their M4s and Vietnam era rifles. This whole sequence of they're stuck with all of their old weapons and they're in a war at a technological level they can't imagine is actually kind of core to the framework that Craig has said was underlying the story. Is if that happened, the humans have no chance in that story. There's no way to win that war. There's no way to fight your way out of that. No amount of good intentions because you're so far outpaced technologically. So you've got this one case of the Kristang are reminding the humans just how outclassed they are, but also kind of core to Craig's storytelling of the humans are way outclassed. If they're going to be players in the story, it's not going to happen in the plucky human makes his way in the world. It's going to be they're going to have to attack the story and enter into the war on criteria that are different than anyone else is playing by right now.
They're going to have to lie, cheat, and steal.
Get sketchy.
Get sketchy. When in doubt, find a beer can on the shelf.
That's right. So, Steve.
Oh, right. Are we ready for In the Galley with Colonel Joe? Cue the music.
In the galley with Colonel Joe, cooking lessons on the radio. Welcome to the show. It's In the Galley with Colonel Joe.
If you've been listening to the podcast, you know we've got this little segment In the Galley with Colonel Joe, because Joe mentions food at every possible opportunity, whether it seemed to make sense or not to the narrative. But it is always fun and enjoyable. Well, today, as we're going through this chapter, there are two main food things that come into focus. You've got the bad meal, the meatloaf and gravy, where they're discussing that meatloaf and what was the gravy? Was it 10W40 motor oil or the hydraulic fluid that the hamsters use on the buzzard ships? Okay, so you've got that's option number one for us to consider here tonight. Option two is a ski is not feeling well, and so he has this bowl of mush. It's plain oatmeal, oats soaked in water, no cream, no sugar, nothing, which Joe goes on to describe as a soggy bowl of sadness. Now, never mind that I love that line, and I find that line eminently quotable. That's like one that I can just work in a regular conversation regularly with people. They have no idea what I'm talking about, but I think it's really funny.
One of my favorite things about that whole line about the soggy bowl of sadness is the way he writes it with the other characters laughing to it. Because it's like somebody going, that was really funny what I said, and then laughing at themselves. Like, but he's got this array of characters to use. So he has the scene, and Joe makes the comment about the soggy bowl of sadness, and then Cornbone's laughing at the whole thing, and he's laughing in a way, and the way R.C. Bray reads it, he's like busting a gut, and he's just like, "Oh my goodness, stop! It's so funny," you know. And it makes me laugh out loud. The very first time I heard this, I laughed out loud. When I listened to it earlier today, when I was preparing for us to chat, I was laughing out loud listening to the scene because it's just, you're right. It is a line that sticks with you, and I just love it. It's so funny.
It is such a great line. And then you get the taglines of, "Is that a Kellogg's brand?" soggy sadness. And then the follow-up to that even, "Is that what it's like to be a Cubs fan?" I mean, that's, I mean, he just keeps punching there. All right. But to my question for all of you for our segment on In the Galley with Colonel Joe tonight, option one, the meatloaf with the hydraulic fluid from the hamsters, or the oats soaked in water with nothing left that become the soggy bowl of sadness. Choose one.
Am I allowed to add to the soggy sadness? Like,
nope, you gotta take it. You gotta take what we get in the story.
I guess meatloaf.
I'll take the meatloaf too.
I just leave the gravy on the side.
I don't think that meatloaf's going to go down without the gravy, you know. So I'm gonna have to go with the soggy bowl of sadness.
Not me. I'm going with the meatloaf and gravy. Everybody over exaggerates what the gravy tastes like in the chow hall. It's way better than we describe it. We just want you guys to think it's horrible, but it's pretty good. But I've never ate on Camp Alpha, so maybe it is that bad.
Even with the,
have you ever been 1,200 light years from Earth and had meatloaf? That wasn't part of your service, right?
No, not in my records.
Yeah. You didn't have that deployment.
No.
I like oatmeal, but I like brown sugar and raisins and cream and he says walnuts and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I like throwing in everything I've got at it. But if I can't do that, I'm skipping the oatmeal.
See, now I'm going to push back on you for a moment there, Joey. What it sounds like is not that you like oatmeal. What it sounds like is you like an excuse to put raisins and walnuts and sugar and everything else all together, and you need a platform for it.
Yeah, basically, I want an oatmeal chocolate chip cookie for breakfast. Yeah, that's about it.
He just doesn't want to go to the trouble of cooking it. Throw everything in a bowl, and that's it.
That's right. Why waste the 20 minutes of putting it in the oven?
For the record, I'm going with the meatloaf and gravy because I do not like oatmeal under any circumstance. So the meatloaf with the hydraulic fluid, gravy for me.
And it's just funny, the whole conversation starts because they're teasing, is this kid that's feeling sick? And they're just getting him worse and worse.
Yeah. It's kind of like when somebody's having a hangover and you're talking about like ashtrays and anything to make them throw up.
PTS.
I'm looking. I think there's only kind of one bigger topic left to make sure that we cover for this chapter, and that is Joe is not going to stay a specialist any longer. Who'd like to introduce us to the new Joe Bishop?
Joey, why don't you give us the why Joey is not just a
why he's not just a specialist anymore?
A specialist, yes. I forgot the word. You just said the word and I forgot it.
It's late. You know what? It's okay. If we get tired and can't remember the words, that's fine. Just text, send me a voice message later with the word and I'll just superimpose it. I'll blur your mouth. All right. So in this chapter, Joe gets promoted to sergeant, and when I remember, going back, I didn't remember him ever not being a sergeant because it's such a small part of this moment on Camp Alpha. It's so easy to miss. But they talk about how when they left Earth, not everybody could make it to Ecuador on time, and they were on Kristang time, so it was hurry up and get on the ship and head to Camp Alpha for training. And so there was some holes in the ranks, and so they were moving people up. And as they did, they got all the way to the bottom, which is where Joe was at. And because of his record somehow, which he had a chance to actually look at one point, and it didn't look great to him, right? It said he had a bad attitude, essentially. But one of his other sergeants actually threw his name into the hat for a promotion, and he got promoted to sergeant, was given his own fire team. And essentially, this specialist, Joe, that we start out with, this kid, this 20-year-old, this is really the first time we're given an opportunity to see him actually have a ranked leadership. And he's you see it, as we've talked about in the last two chapters, there's these little nuggets of seeing Joe's leadership capacity. Even though he's this dumb kid, we see these things come to fruition, and we see him kind of step up to the leader that he can be. There's a couple other things that are mentioned in this portion where he's talking to Captain Andrews and giving him the promotion, telling him to stay out of trouble. He talks about Joe having scars on his left arm, which is in his file. I think it's the only time it's ever mentioned that Joe has scars on his left arm, because he got a Purple Heart that's in there. But it sort of ends with him being grateful that the captain didn't say anything about his situation with Barney. And of course, then the captain at the very last moment, as Joe's leaving, says, "Hey, Bishop, stay away from ice cream trucks," which is pretty funny. And then the last thing that I'm going to say about him getting promoted is that the first person to call and congratulate him was Shauna. And it's at this point where the story is ending at the end of the chapter, and we're pivoting into what's going to become the next chapter. And that's where we kind of veer into where they're getting deployed to their first engagement with the enemy, which is pretty interesting, and that's coming up in the next chapter.
And I like the ends too, where they talk about how they can communicate to each other through the Z phone. And I think one of the jokes is, how do I block phone calls? Just because they're like, well, we'll still be able to get in contact with each other. It's just even though we're moving to another part of the planet.
Yeah, Cornbone says, how do I block his number? Because he says, remember, Joe, if you ever find yourself in a situation you don't know what to do, ask yourself, what would Jesse do? And then Joe replies, and then do the opposite. Yeah, it's fun little camaraderie there.
That makes me think of something. I didn't think about it with the scars, and he received the Purple Heart because before Columbus Day, he was in Nigeria. And then the alien invasion happened, and he was on leave. And I always thought it was kind of odd that, we got an alien invasion going on, and we got a member of the military on leave. And I wonder if there is some sort of untold backstory that he was on a medical leave recovering from injuries that he received in Nigeria, because he was only 20 years old at the time. So it's not like he had this huge, long career in the military, but it kind of makes you think. It's just one of those stories. I wonder if we don't really know the answer. We may never know the answer, but
yeah, it could have just been that he just rotated home for a little bit.
Could be.
Yeah, something simple.
Well, we do know that he was dumb in Nigeria, and we'll get to that at some point, so we can hold that conversation. But we actually find out some of what he did in Nigeria along the way, and that'll be an entertaining conversation when it comes. So yeah, they are headed off to the great planet Gatanu, Perdassus, Paradise, as the humans are calling it. We get a little description of what Paradise is like. I thought this was interesting, so I wanted to take note of it before we wrap this chapter. It describes it as one large continent with some islands and the rest of it being water. And I point that out because obviously that is one of those things that changes very, very significantly as we go, that the southern continent of Lemuria becomes a significant player in the story, as that's where the humans will eventually get moved to. They'll all be relocated to that southern continent of Lemuria. But in the first description we get of paradise is there's only one continent and then a bunch of islands surrounding it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That's something that does shift as we learn more about paradise later on, that there is more than one continent. It may be a much smaller continent, but that initial description of just one continent does change for us. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here tonight as we wrapped up chapter 3 of Columbus Day. Any other thoughts, anything that we didn't get to that you guys want to jump in on?
This was a long, long one.
Well, we can be excited about the next chapter, but it is going to be a little bit till we get there, because as we come to a wrap on this episode of the Merry Band of Pirates, an unofficial Expeditionary Force podcast, we want to give 2 things here to share with you. First, we want to ask you, our listeners, to do a little homework. Reach out to us on socials or by email with any ideas or suggestions you may have. Like us, the feeds on Apple Podcasts. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Give us a little bit of feedback. We would love to hear, and if we like it, and if we feel like doing it, then maybe we'll give you a shout out. You can find our socials in the show notes on all of the different sites. Just look in the show notes for the links to all of those. But that is number 1. Number 2, and this is huge, and we teased it at the beginning, and all of us can't believe we get to say this, given that we're just a handful of episodes into this podcast. But our very next episode will feature a special guest. There will be 7 of us, because Craig Allenson himself is joining us on the next episode of the podcast.
Amazing.
We are thrilled. We're really kind of shocked. He gave us a little shout out in his live video a couple weeks ago. We've been sharing that clip all over, so hopefully you've seen or heard that. But he has also graciously accepted our invitation to come and be on the podcast. So be looking forward to that. There will be some extra special news coming along with that. But we don't want to play all of our cards for you quite yet. Well, thanks for joining us on this episode of the Merry Band of Pirates. And with that, I go to Jake for
Trust the awesomeness. That ain't right, though. Can we do that one more time? As soon as it's halfway out, I'm like, I messed up.
Yeah, I mean,
Just do your part again, Jake, because I can stitch it.
Always trust the awesomeness.
He watched his own live as we were watching his live, talking about a skip coin.
So
Very meta.
it's kind of amazing.
It's a little like the trying to explain to the giraffe the fantasy sports. It's a little it's a little meta at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys realize that his live stream was 1 hour and 19 minutes and our episode was 1 hour and 21 minutes long.
See, I got Barney.
You got a Barney. I love it.
And I got all the books.
I saw that. That's awesome. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, my bank account is not jealous. My dad had to fix the door because my dog kept rolling inside of the library and stealing Barney. And Barney was on the floor a few times. And if we leave him alone for too long, he would definitely chew the hell up Barney. So
Aw.
my dad finally fixed the door. because I had to keep Barney in my car for a few days. Keep it safe.
Gotta keep Barney safe.
Mm-hmm.
The guy's like on the floor. For the life of me, I don't even know what we were debating at this point. And the guy gets up and in his argument, he says, you can try and put a saddle on a duck and ride it, but it won't work out well for either you or the duck.
So, are we all drinking? I know who said that was not Charlie's not drinking, right? No,
Oh
Jake.
no.
I'll probably grab an NA.
Yeah, I'm debating if I go just buy a regular beer or I make a Brazilian drink.
Oh, you should make a Brazilian drink.
Yeah, make
Yeah.
the caipirinha.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm gonna make the caipirinhas. God, but I get so drunk so fast. I'm gonna have to be like tiny little sips to be able to survive the hour.
Just get some red wine. It'll last.
I
You'll be
cannot.
asleep by the
I
end of.
cannot.
No, you won't be asleep. Craig will be on the show, so
Yeah.
it might work out in our favor.
Could be really funny for us, right, Jake?
Yep.
No, thank you.
Who knows what kind of questions will bubble out of you?
Just one thing.
It's okay to be excited, Marianne.
She sounds excited.
No, I just wanted to correct you while you were talking, but I don't know if we want to say we invited him or do we want to say that he offered. Are we okay with we invited him? Because technically he offered.
Either way, it goes. I mean,
Well,
you know,
tell us the story, Marianne. Did we invite him or did he offer? How did it happen?
He offered.
nummy, 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 nummy.
Don't record, don't show this, Joey.
Oh, this is totally going in the outtakes. 100%.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
No, the
Marianne, are we
message
going to
was-
use his cardboard cutout that you have, the life size, for next week?
Yeah. Don't tell anybody about that. Like hiding the cardboard side.
Right off screen.
Do we want to re-record that section?
No, I like it. But if you
No,
want
I
to,
think we're good. No, please don't say that. No, yeah, I think we are fine with we invited him, not get people too excited about him inviting himself
yeah, I don't think
to
he's going
our
to be
special place.
your special place. What?
Hey, it's our special place. Come on.
We were hanging out by ourselves and just fine, and then he barged through the door and just did not know how to take no for an answer, and just kept forcing his way in.
Said,
Oh,
"Here's
that's so-
hold my beer can."
Yeah, he was trying to pull a Skippy.
Said, hey, monkeys, Craigy's here.
I hear there's karaoke.